Hello, and thank you for joining today's Manufacturing Power Hour, Understanding the Part Environment. My name is Don Warner, and I'm an applications engineer here at M2 Technologies. About M2 Technologies. M2 Technologies is a consulting firm focused on productivity, improving manufacturing process efficiency, and reducing manufacturing costs. Using generative design, best-in-class manufacturing and asset management processes, our team of industry experts can help you become more sustainable, more profitable, more prepared to meet today's demands of urbanization in a rapidly changing world. What we do is some BIM for manufacturing, asset management, process automation, and data management. We are also an industry-leading partner with Autodesk, Panzora, Eagle Point Pinnacle, and Bluebeam. Some of our services that are not limited to, but some are CAD management, software development, project lifecycle management, generative design, CAM, training, standard development, and many more. My name is Don Warner, and I'm an application engineer. I have 30 years experience, some with a channel partner, Autodesk product support, and I've also been a manufacturing designer. Today's agenda will cover some part sketching tips and some settings, some browser settings and tips, basic work plane features and options, covering some object visibility, view representation, and UI settings, and also utilizing the new properties feature dialog box within the part environment. The first slide I'd like to discuss would be setting your background, your screen background, and how it affects the unconstrained and constrained geometry. Within the application options, you have the ability to set an in-canvas color scheme. In other words, this is your background. Depending on what you select here in the drop-down menu, will dictate what color your unconstrained geometry will be. As you can see on the screenshots on the left, there are several canvases set: light, presentation, high contrast, and forest. And as you can see, the one vertical line is constrained on the height, and that's how it changes the colors. So it knows that this line cannot go more than 1 inch. And in the light background, it shows a purple color. The presentation, it shows more of a blackish color. High contrast, it's a more of a higher contrast blue. And in the forest, it's more of a lighter contrast blue. This is how you can tell what geometry is constrained. Talking a little bit more about some more sketch options is the Inference and Persistent mode when you're in sketching. Again, within the options, you can select your Sketch tab, and there are constraint settings in the upper left. If you select the Settings dialog box, another dialog box will appear with General, Inference, and Relax Mode tabs. In the Inference tab, there is a selection at the very top for Inference and Persistent constraint. The Infer constraint allows you to basically, when it is set, allows you to draw the line or the circle or whatever geometry is, and if certain constraints fall within the points picked, they will be displayed on the screen. They will not be placed unless you have the persistent constraint checked off. So again, to go over this, if none were checked off, if the infer and persistent were not checked on, when you draw the line, it's more in a free-forming mode. You will not have any icons or tooltips show up telling you the length or the constraints that are applied. If you just had the infer constraint selected, if you drew a vertical line or a horizontal line, for example, you would get the icon to show up. When you pick the second point of the line, your line would be vertical, but it would not have applied the constraint. If you selected the persistent constraint option, this constraint would then be applied. Another option is the relax mode. The relax mode allows you to basically take a fully constrained sketch or even partly constrained sketch and move the geometry and have those constraints that were applied deleted. So again, it allows you to quickly go in and not have you delete dimensions and constraints to go ahead and move geometry. It quickly suppresses, in a way, the constraints that are applied. And if you go ahead and you pick the point, or you go ahead and you drag and drop the geometry where desired, those constraints would then be deleted. I'd go ahead and switch to Inventor, and I'm going to show you just some of those settings. So what I'll show you here is the constraining of the geometry. I'm going to go ahead and double click on the sketch one, and it'll put me into the edit mode. You'll see that the center point is located down here. So I've started this geometry from the center point, which will basically go ahead and make all this information fully constrained. I'll add a circle up here, and you can see that the circle is black. But if I go ahead and I add a couple of quick dimensions, locating the points, I've located and locked down the center, but I still haven't controlled the diameter. Once I control the diameter, it will turn blue. If I go ahead and go into the application options and go to my sketch tab and to the settings, I'll go to the inference and I'll turn off the infer constraints. As a matter of fact, I'm going to turn off both of these. And I'll go ahead and I'll draw a line. And again, I'm more in a free-forming mode. You do not see any constraints being applied. You can kind of see, depending on how I get into a snap, I'll go back into the application options. I'll turn on infer constraint only, apply that and close. So now when I draw this line, it will then start to show you the constraints. See the horizontal and the vertical. So I have placed two lines on the screen. Now, if I go to my show constraints, notice that there's no constraints here for these objects. I'll go back into my application options and turn on persistent mode and draw the same two lines. There's the vertical. There's the horizontal. So now you can see the constraints are actually showing up where these ones did not. So that's a little bit on the infer and persistent constraints. The other one I'd like to show you here is the relax mode. There's a setting down here for the relax mode. And what that really does is, I'm going to go ahead and zoom up on this. If I just wanted to go ahead and drag and move this geometry out, it's locked into place. It's not allowing me to select that. If I go ahead and I toggle this on, this is the relax mode. I'll go ahead and show you the settings first. In the application options, sketch tab, relax mode. Here is the enabling of relax mode. If I were to push that button down here, it's a toggle that turns this on and off. Again, some of the settings, the top 4 settings here, I would not recommend you take off, or excuse me, check on, I should say, is because these, basically, if you had 2 lines that shared an endpoint, if you grabbed a line and moved it out, it wouldn't go with it. The bottom line wouldn't drag with it. So the 4 here are basically, in a way, a way that lines, arcs, or circles are connected to one another. So again, it's just something you want to think about. So I'll go ahead and I'll check this on. I'll say okay, and I'll exit out of here. So now that it's pushed in, as you can see down here, if I go ahead and I just drag this out, you can see the perpendicular down here. It's in a pink rectangle, which means that that is what's going to get deleted. And then you would have to go ahead and reconstrain this or dimension. You know, maybe what we needed to have here is a angular dimension. In this case, this was supposed to be a 60-degree angle. You know, again, you'd have to change things up, but again, that is what relax mode allows you to do. Quickly delete constraints that are applied to objects. Okay, another area I'd like to show you are the part browser tools and options. Within a part environment, the browser can get quite cumbersome. Depending on how complex your part is, you could have hundreds of features in the browser. What the browser allows you to do is manipulate these features. You can rename them. If you go ahead and you use a naming convention on your features, on your sketches, on your work features, the one nice thing about the browser is it allows you for a search tool where you can quickly type in a name. It will search the solid bodies, the name views, the sketches, the work features. Basically applying a filter that will quickly allow you to get to that certain feature you want and make an edit or whatever the manipulation you want. The first folder you'll see underneath is a solid bodies folder. Basically, you can go ahead and you can create different solid bodies from the extrusions, the revolves, any of the features. Within the feature operation, there is a selection tool or a option to make it a separate solid body. This is more of a top-down assembly design approach where you can use a single part file, create a bunch of multi-body solids, and then you can write those out to an assembly file. I'll get into that a little bit later. The next area down is the view representation area. This allows you to basically set different views that control color overrides, work feature displays, and the view position of the model. There's also an origin folder that shows you the default planes that come with each part file. These planes and axes are based around the center point. You design your part around that center point. Those planes and axes and center point can be used for constraining inside the assembly environment. And another feature, or a couple features that the browser allows you to do to manipulate your part model is using something called feature reorder, where you can move features up and below other features, depending if there are no dependencies above or below. There's also an end of part marker that quickly allows you to move this up to basically delete or suppress features in memory. This allows you to quickly manipulate end of features such as fillets and holes, chamfers, some information that is usually applied at the very end. You can quickly move end of part marker up to take those features out of memory, and you can go ahead and design at that point. So a little bit on the search tool, like I had mentioned here, the screenshot on the left is basically I've typed in a word called base, and in different areas of the browser I had renamed features, views, sketches, solid bodies for the word base. The next icon or the screenshot in the middle shows the end of part marker can be moved up and down. And again, if you use fillets and chamfers and holes towards the very end of your part, you can go ahead and you can manipulate them up. You can move them up quickly take these out of memory, so your total rebuild, your feature rebuilds are quicker in a larger part file. Just something to be thinking of. And there's also a icons on the right is a feature reorder where you can move features up and below other features. This is something that if there's no dependencies on those features, you can move them up and around. It will make things a little easier. And I do have a little demonstration on that. Again, just to reiterate, the solids folder and the origin folder, in the upper left, it's a couple of solid objects that I've drawn. Each one of these I've made an independent solid. In the screenshot of the properties dialog box, under the output of the Boolean operation, the farthest icon to the right, that's the select make it a new solid. And you can see on the pot browser next to the screenshot is another one showing the individual solid names, which again can be renamed for ease of manipulation. In the origin folder, again, any part that you create, depending on how you create around the center point, the default planes will fall depending on where that initial sketch is based on that center point. Again, it makes it easy for these to be used when you go ahead and you assemble inside your assembly drawings or your assembly environment, how you're using constraints and lining up the planes on other parts. All right, I'd like to just flip and show you a little bit on what I talked about. All right, I'm going to go ahead and switch to a different file. And what I'm going to do is, for example, let me just pick a plane here. It doesn't really matter. I'll use this one. I'll go ahead and I'll rename this plane. And just for, I'm going to name this sketch center sketch. And using the search tool, I can go ahead and I just type in the word center, and it will find exactly what has been named center in the file. If I wanted to edit the sketch, I can simply edit the sketch. It's tied to the feature. I can edit the feature. It's a nice tool that allows you to quickly search your browser for the information that's named. If you want to clear the browser, you can just simply hit the X. If I scroll to the very bottom of the browser, you will notice the end of part marker. I'll go ahead and I'll start to move this up. And you can see I'll go ahead and I'll drag it up above these fillets. Continue to drag it up over the fillets. Continue to drag it up over the fillets. You can kind of see this part is losing or out of memory. It's forcing information to not be generated. So if there was a certain point where you needed to move this up to add a feature in here, you could simply, move the end of part marker up, add the feature that you need here, and just drag this back down. I'll go ahead and regenerate. There are some things, if you were to add that feature and, later on you're notching it out, you would basically get some errors downstream saying the material, is no longer there. Just something to be aware of. I'm just going to go ahead and switch to a real simple part here. I just basically created a real simple shape that consists of, some holes and a shell operation and a cube. So the feature reorder, again, depending on the dependencies you have, for example, the shell, I could slide the shell above the hole and you can kind of see what happens. Extrusion, shell, then the holes get created. If I want the holes, then the shell, Again, how you just simply drag and move these features around will dictate how your model updates. Again, depending on dependencies, you may get some errors, or you may get a circle with a dash through it saying you can't move it up. But again, it is dependent on how things are created. It makes it a little easy to manipulate the model. Notice the origin folder here, just real quickly in the origin folder. I'll turn these planes on. Oh, I'll turn the visibility of this guy on too. So you can see the default work planes are not necessarily displayed, but as you develop your part and you utilize the center point, draw your part around the center point, your default planes and axes will be available to you when you go ahead and you use the constraining objects when you build your assemblies. Just quickly turn these off. And I'll set a sketch to assign to the face here. I'll just quickly draw a rectangle. It doesn't matter what the shape is. And if I extrude this, in the properties dialog box, you will see on the Boolean operation, there is a new solid. If you select that, it does change a little bit of color, but what's going to happen is you will see a new solid gets created here. So if you had a assembly that you wanted to draw, basic information out in a part file, you can go ahead and you can create these solids. And then through the make components command, you can write these out, separate solids as part files, and it creates the information. I'd like to move on to the next area and talk a little bit about the work features that are available to you in the part environment. You've probably stumbled across how to create the work planes and the work axis and the work points, but there are some information that you might find useful. Within the location of your work plane, you'll notice that there's a drop down, the screenshots on the right. If there are, if you're working in a very complex file, or even the window that you're working in has a lot of geometry that you can go ahead and pick for your work feature dependencies, whether it's an axis, another plane, an edge, point. It's kind of cumbersome to get in there and work. You might have to right click and use your select other tool. The other options you have is if it's a specific work plane you want to create, look at what you have in the options at the drop down. You can select that option. It mitigates the possible mistakes by picking incorrect geometry. And a little bit about the work feature, the work axis. Again, a lot of people just think you can pick cylindrical edges and it just automatically throws the work axis in. Excuse me, cylindrical faces, not edges. If you select the cylindrical face, the axis gets popped in. But you can also create a work axis from, a linear edge, 2D sketch, a 3D sketch. You can also use sketch point centers located on two different sketches to drive the points of a work axis. So it does give you a little bit of flexibility, and it provides using sketching dimensions to drive how the axis will behave. And I'll demonstrate that in a minute. The other thing, which is really just a work point, this is not as used as often as the axis and the work planes, I feel. But if you get into 3D sketches where you're trying to lay out a series of points, You can definitely do that and use work points, and then using whether it's a spline or a line command, you can connect the dots per se. Work points are heavily used in the tube and pipe environment. You can also, like I said, place these work points on hole centers within the sketch only. Allows you to drive the line for that information. All right, I'd just like to flip and show you a little bit on the work features. I'll go ahead and open the work features part file. I'd like to show you some examples of how you can use the work features and knowing some of the information generated that those features within the browser. You notice here I've kind of moved this end of part marker up because I've got some information here I want to kind of show you on a couple of steps. But one option here is work plane 1. Again, this can be renamed. I'm not going to bother doing that now, but I'm going to right click on this work plane 1. I'm going to say show inputs. So one of the nice things about this, it will actually show you, okay, it was an offsetted work plane. I leave the tooltip over it. See plane by offset work plane. So the show input shows you the face that I created this from. So I basically highlighted this face and dragged this in because what I wanted to do is get a sketch that goes right through this piece. So I'm going to move the edit part marker down, and I'm going to turn on sketch 6. And I'm going to go do F7 on my screen, which is going to be a slice graphics. I apologize. Let me get into this. There we go. I'll slice the graphics in the sketch mode. So that plane runs through the part. And I've basically just drawn a line in here. Sketched in a line. I know I need roughly about 10 degrees. I could actually dimension how far off it is from that point if I wanted to. But this is just an example. I've got it as 10 degrees. I'm going to drive a hole right down through it. So what I did next was I had to put a work axis. So the only way I could figure out how to get a work axis at 10 degrees on that plane is I drew a sketch line in there, and I was able to pick that sketch line for my work axis. And then what I ended up doing was created a plane. So in essence, I had to create a work point. That work point you can see it says show inputs, and it gets to be a little bit tricky, but you gotta see what highlighted is. It shows you the highlighted face up here, and it shows you the axis highlighted, and that's how I drove the work point there. And then from that work point, I created a work plane. Okay, the plane, again, consisted of selecting the work point, selecting the axis. It draws a plane perpendicular to it. The next work plane, I dragged it a little bit above it, because if I were to draw a circle in there and blow the hole through, I'd only get half the circle cut, because the other half would be inside the part down. So I dragged the hole up to create my extrusion. So that's one way you can use work axis in a sketch. I'm gonna go ahead and I'll rotate it around. I want to bring down, I'm going to show 2 sketches here. I'm going to turn them both on. And as you can see, what I did was I'm sketching on this top face here, and I've placed a work point. Excuse me, I've placed a sketch point, a hole point center. It's a little different. Same thing at the bottom. If I rotate this up, you'll notice it's at the bottom there too. And that's sketch 8 and sketch 9. So what I did next, I'm going to drag this part marker down. is I went ahead and I created 2 work points. Now what I did was I simply, it's kind of hard to see on the screen here, but I simply, there it is, a little contrast now. If I take it off, you can see it, it's kind of highlighted. So I placed a work point right on that whole center on sketch 8. I did the same on sketch 9 down here. So the next thing I did was I then created a work axis. And that work axis was simply using the 2 work points. You can see on the show inputs. So bang, bang, and then basically using the same approach that I just showed you. The next was a work plane. Then I had to create another work plane. Again, flipping it and going it up, not flipping it, but dragging it above. And then when there, I create my extrusion. And I blow the hole through the part. So what's nice about this, I could come in here to sketch 8 and say, oh, you know what, that wasn't 30 degrees, that was supposed to be 60. Now you can kind of see the extrusion take place at a much greater angle. I've got control on the bottom point too. I could do the same in the bottom point. Maybe that was supposed to be 30 degrees, 10 degrees. Do the update on the part. Again, I might not be breaking through on this, but again, it allows you to manipulate. It allows you to manipulate that part, depending on how you want to control or use sketching options to generate those work features. All right, another area I'd just like to talk about briefly here is object visibility. It's pretty straightforward. These are global settings located in the view menu in the visibility area. You'll notice object visibility with a drop down. That drop down selection is the screenshot to the left. Again, these are global settings. So if I were to go in there and turn these on or off, for example, if I were to go in and turn off the work planes, they are shut off. You could go in, you can create as many work planes as you want in the part, but they're just simply not going to display. The visibility setting, if you right click over the work plane and you set it to visible or not visible and back to visible again, it will not be shown at all. This is a global setting that's turned off until you physically turn these on. Some of the other things you can use in your part files, if you're getting into, again, complex designs and you're working in areas, you have certain work planes and work axes, sketches you want to turn on. You can quickly set a view representation that will control your color overrides. It will control your work feature visibility and your view orientation and the browser expansion states. The other thing about view representation is you can actually save these. So when you open the file, again, through the Inventor, the initial open again, next time you go to work on it, you can actually select the view representation you want to open. And there's also a user interface visibility settings where if you accidentally turn off your view cube or your navigation bar, your menu marking bar, your model browser, you can also turn them on here through the interface visibility settings. I'll go ahead and I'll just flip to Inventor and just briefly go through these for you. I'll go ahead and switch to a different file. And what we'll do is talk a little bit about what I just explained. The object visibility, if I turn on the view panel here and go over to object visibility, this is what I was talking about here. If you want to just turn off the work plane display, I'll go ahead and turn that off, and I'll come up here and we'll take a look at the initial first work plane here, the center plane that I renamed. See if I right click it over visibility, nothing happens. The visibility is checked on, but you can't see it. I mean, you can highlight it. That's about it. You can't use it. You won't be able to drag it off. So again, you'll have to come back in here to the view object visibility and turn these back on in order to see that. And again, you have different options here of what you want and how you want to control it. So in this part, what I've done is in the view area, I've created a couple of views here. And if I double click on these views, you'll notice that it quickly changes. And in this view, I happen to have a displayed turned on. So again, I've set this up. So I've turned it. And again, if I wanted to come down here and turn on a plane on this one, you can unlock it and lock it. So you can quickly set axes and work planes on depending on how you are working in that environment. Again, it's not really used all that much unless you get into a really large complex file. It is used more in the assembly environment. If I were just to close this file down, I'll just say yes to the save, and I go ahead and I open it again. Sorry, from the home window. What I want to do is open. I can go ahead and I can pick the representation here. Under options is where you can pick here if you're doing a generic open. Opens in that view rep. If I were to go back to the home and do it here, you have to do it under the actions. Open with options, and then that's where you pick your view rep. As far as the marking, the feature, such as the view cube, your navigation bar, if you go to the view menu and the user interface, these are the settings here. You can see the view cube is disappearing, navigation bar, model browser. You can also get the model browser back here. So just some different areas of things disappear on you. The first place I would go and look would be this user interface. And the last thing really just to talk about, you've kind of seen me using this throughout the seminar, is the ability to use the properties palette. This is a new dialog box that's been introduced by the Inventor software, where if features share the common inputs, such as extrude and revolve, you are picking profiles and you are, the behavior and the advanced properties. This information is pretty much the same in a in a few of these commands where you can basically edit the feature and the sketch within the same dialog box, providing you a little bit less picks and clicks to make quick modeling changes. And again, I'll just show you here that if I were just to right click on the edit feature here, extrusion 1, you can just see that the properties dialog box pops up. If you want to edit the feature, you can edit it here. If you want to edit the sketch, click on the sketch at the top, and you can come in right and drive into the sketch. So again, it's nice, it's quick. The dialog box allows you to dock it, depending on where you want to dock it on your screen. It can only be docked vertically. And it cannot be docked at the top or the bottom. Well, thank you for taking the time to review these tips and tricks within the part modeling environment. I hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at the information that's on your screen. We'd be happy to help. I hope this was useful, and I do hope you have a great day.